Is one enough?
You can never have too many bicycles. There's so many incredible builders out there, and every time I look at their websites, I think to myself, maybe I'm going to treat myself to another bicycle. This is where I store my bicycles. The Brian Bayless goes up on top, away from everything else.
Right.
That's my jewel. I guess there's some emotion behind the Bayless. There's less emotion behind the look or the time frame.
When all that flux is nice and melty, clear, it almost looks like it's not there anymore.
Now we're looking at the Richard Sachs side, right?
Absolutely beautiful lug work. You can see the beautiful transition between the white head tube and the down tube and lug. It's very sharply demarcated. The red runs along the edge of the lug here.
This is a Columbine Cycles head badge.
Yes, and it looks like a piece of art. And there's some stones here, maybe rubies. Probably number one was appearance. There was a certain look that I wanted to have. And I wanted to have some degree of input into how the bike would look. Of course, price was a factor. This was in 1996 that the frame was built.
Are you going to sort of reveal to us what your budget was?
I think $2,000 was the budget at the time.
Now that's the frame alone.
That was a frame and fork.
This is the frame, folks, and that's the fork, right? And what happens when you add all the other bits to it?
I guess that roughly doubled the price of the bicycle. Cheap competitors at that time, in terms of production frames, were running roughly $1,000 to $1,200.
It's about half.
Yeah, and then they were the famous Italian frames, Colnago and Pinarello and De Rosa. I wanted a certain look, and I guess I had the means. I ended up treating myself to a frame like this.
Good for you. How did you get fitted?
I mentioned to the types of bikes that I've ridden before, the sizes of the bikes and what I liked about them, what I didn't like about them. Bicycling Magazine did an article, and they showcased several builders which I guess were the up-and-coming frame builders at the time. Richard Sachs was one of them, John Columbine, Brian Bayless, Peter Weigel was there. I think Chas Roberts was on that list. This was my first choice. Bicycles built by John Columbine from Columbine Cycle Works. Absolutely ornate.
Look at that! This looks like something from Tiffany.
Yes, if this is the look you want, this is who you have to go to.
This is now the side of Bruce Gordon.
This looks like a custom stem built for the frame. You can see the matching colors and the stainless steel lug work with
and
the
hearts.
heart cutout windows. Isn't that absolutely amazing?
We heart hearts, don't we?
Ultimately, Brian Bayless was a person I settled on because I fell in love with his frame that was written about in Bicycling Magazine in the late 1970s.
Right.
So you can see here, we have the main tube is a blue. We have the lug is painted white, and then the transition between the tube and the lug is outlined by a gold pinstripe.
And this is where the builder puts their signature.
Some people will say built by Brian Bayless 4, and then they put my name there. And that really gives it a personal touch. The purist would say you have to place Campagnolo parts on a bicycle like this. And so that's what I did.
Brook saddle?
The Brook saddle, of course.
What's the riding?
I've done all different rides. I've done pack rides in it, although I don't like to do that too often because if I ever crash it, it'll break my heart.
I find myself eyeballing people's bikes, wondering, is that a handmade bike? Peter's story. What have you got, Peter?
I have a Roberts Custom Audax, which was built in 2004.
You bought this bike for sizing reasons.
Yeah, it's I'm very tall and it's all in my legs, so I needed a bike that was...
I have to turn the camera sideways, I think.
So I needed a bike that was both very tall and very short from front to back.
A woman's geometry, but a tall man.
For a man who's not quite 6'3".
So off-the-shelf bikes, they don't really come that way?
Nothing seems to fit.
Point out some salient features on this wonderful bike.
Roberts is a small frame shop south of London. They build steel bikes only. This is supposedly their hot model, the compact Audax.
And what's Audax for people who are...
A style of riding where you sort of ride day and night, sometimes for several days, basically against the clock, not at racing speeds, but the idea is the clock never stops.
Like a PvP kind of.
Like a PvP type thing, exactly.
Paris.
The C-tube angle is rocked back a little bit, so it carries more weight on the saddle and less on your arms. It's a less aggressive posture. The frame is spaced to leave room for fenders and slightly larger tires, and that means the brakes have to be a little bit longer this way to reach around the extra tires on the fenders. I asked for these little brackets to be put on to carry lights and blinkies and things. Sort of halfway between a racing bike and a touring bike. It's not as heavy duty as a touring bike.
So they call it randonneuring, is that
Precise. It is comfortable, fairly fast, not as fast as it could be, not as light as it could be, but not bad overall.
And what did you pay for this?
$2,200. The frame was half of that. One of the reasons for buying a British frame was that at the time they were noticeably cheaper than American frames. Back then, an American frame seemed to begin at about $1,800, and I can't believe they've gotten any cheaper. And I think the British frames have only gotten slightly more expensive. This is not built with lugs, it's what they call fillet brazed, which means the joints are smooth and just sort of flow into each other. The exception is, for some reason, that uses a lugged bottom bracket. They do give you this little bit of bling at the bottom of putting the Roberts name on the
look,
bottom
that's
bracket.
actually, that's not painted, folks, that's actually etched in.
Actually etched.
I tell you what, Kryptonite should do that with the numbers on their combination locks.
There you go.
They rub off and then you don't know, then you have to use relative positioning. Kryptonite.
Pretty little fork with a cutout design here. Handlebar tape is old-fashioned cotton tape.
Cotton.
Covered with pounds of shellac, which gives it this slightly leathery feel.
So a much more sensible place to put the pump. There, out of the way, and you can still carry your bike on the shoulder. A little star, and then, what have you got here? Clouds behind the Roberts?
And this is me, Kennedy.
Peter Kennedy's story.
This is my fast bike, my club bike.
Have you ever been tempted by carbon fiber?
Yes. Unfortunately, I'm at the position of my wife saying, what? Not another bike.
What are your other bikes at the moment?
I have a Thorn touring bike. I have a 1951 Rolly 3-speed, which is my all-around town errand bike. And then we have a pair of Bike Friday tandems, which I maintain belong to the children, not to me.
Very comfortable, delightful in city traffic, delightful on the long haul.
So here I am with Johnny Coast, walking to his secluded workshop.
Yeah.
You can see it from a mile. It's got a rooster on a bike. What's the significance of the rooster on the bike?
We used to raise chickens here.
This is the mill.
It's a Bridgeport. It's a 1963 Bridgeport. I miter a lot of the tubes on this. This is my jig. It's a Henry James. And this holds the frame in place while I braze it together. My torches. My bench vise, where a lot of the work is actually done by hand. This is a frame in progress. This is a lug. At this point, this one's been thinned and I'm getting ready to tack and braze the rest of it together. It'll be the front triangle and then the rear triangle. This is a full-scale drawing I do of each frame. Surface plate. The frame is suspended over the plate and you can measure deflection and see if it's in plane or not.
So here's something that looks close to finished.
If you look at the lugs, this is what's sort of called a half lug. It's not my idea. Sort of a unique approach where half of the lug has been removed and a fillet has been put in its place, and then the lug to the head tube, as you can see.
So for the newbies, explain what a fillet is. It's not steak, right? It's
Right. This is a fillet, and this is just brass laid down to join the tubes, and then it's sanded smooth. The crown is old, and I built the fork out using the crown. Yeah, correct. I mean, it was new. It was never used.
Do you collect these things and just store them, or you can buy them?
A little bit of both.
Of course, a Brooks saddle.
Yeah.
Now the green bike. What's this one?
This is actually this is a 650B fixed gear rondineur. Really inspired by Alex Singer. I made that. I make rear racks too. It's got old school Mayfac Raid brakes. It's made specifically for those brakes. Renee Hurst Crown, a company that has been continued, and they're making this stuff again.
You make this little cutout here, is that
it's
right?
a Henry James lug, and I just cut that out. One of the latest ones I'm working on, these are Pasenti lugs, and they come really long and large so that you can carve your own designs into them, which I've done here. And I didn't quite like the transition, so what I did is I added some brass as a fillet to make the transition a lot smoother. It sort of emulates the old school stamped lugs too.
I hear you started welding at the earliest legal age.
My father taught me how to weld by the time I was 12, so it started earlier. He was welding hot rod cars.
Right, and it's Rick Coast, is that right?
Rick Coast is his name, famous car builder and hot rodder. He had his own shop and he customized cars for all sorts of people and got me started. I went to the UBI, that's United Bicycle Institute.
Ashland or Portland?
Yes,
Oregon.
Ashland, Oregon. Went and studied stem building and fillet brazing with Yamaguchi in Rifle, Colorado. Got to hang out with this person who's built, you know, thousands of frames, and he worked for Sanren Show, and he's just like this very brilliant person, and taught me all sorts of little tricks. The difference between the two schools was really great, and I liked both styles, but he was a very hands-on teacher, so he'd say, okay, now I want you to do these processes, and you'd start to do this thing, and he'd stand back and watch, and then he'd shake his head and grab the tools and do it, sort of do it as an example for you, and then he'd hand you the tools, and you'd take over and quietly work, and he'd, you know, watch, and he'd take them and do it for you. I learned really quick because I got my hands right on the materials and started working. The younger folks are interested in the fixies, or the single speed, or the track bike. I get a lot of young kids. And folks are interested in rondoneuring or a bit older.
Oh, so you get the full range.
I get kind of both ends, which is kind of nice. I'm preheating the lug, and I'm melting all this flux so it becomes nice and clear. The flux is going to tell me how hot this steel is. And when it's up to temperature, I'm going to start adding my silver. This is silver. And it actually bonds on like a microscopic level. The crystals and the steel open on up. And they suck this into it just a little bit. It's actually going to go inside this tube and create this sort of internal fillet even. I always let the steel think about it for a second. I know that these tires are going to be a little wide, so I'm going to say, you know what, give a little dimple on the inside so that you can have tire and fender clearance.
Now this drawing is actually your blueprint, is it, for the bike? Yeah. Is it life size? This is what they teach you at UBI? There's a plan, folks. It's not all just
There's a plan.
Shooting from the hip here, is it? It's
a little bit of both.
Seth or Oscar, your specialty is TIG welded frames.
That's the difference between TIG welding and brazing, is that TIG welding you join the metal with the parent material. We're joining steel with steel, not with brass or silver. Dirt jumping frame.
How does this differ from steel lugs?
Well, we're actually melting the metal together and adding a similar material, steel. We're not gluing the frame together with silver or brass. We're actually melting more steel into the joints.
So why would someone choose this kind of frame over perhaps a traditional steel lug? Is it just aesthetic?
Aesthetics, different tubing profiles. This has a biaxial down tube, so it's a weird shape. It's oval vertically in the front and horizontally in the rear.
So there's more options as far as angles, geometries, and...
I started in 96 or 97. I went to UBI with my finished frame, which is hanging up on the wall up there, that green one. Dropped that off at a local bike factory to ask about getting it painted, and they offered me a job, and that was how I got my start. Johnny and I do totally different stuff. I do, you know, mountain BMX street stuff, and he does classic road and racing bike.
So they're not so obsessed with weight then, the weight of the frame?
Well, you can get a steel frame ridiculously light as titanium or aluminum, and it's got its feel of steel. No other bike rides like a steel bike.
Typically, how much would a frame cost from you?
Base price is $900.
For a frame?
For a frame to start, and then there's tubing upgrade.
Does that include the fork, or is the fork extra?
A lot of the road frames, people generally get a carbon fork. For the dirt jump frames and stuff, they'll either use a suspension fork or a custom rigid fork. So.
Hand-built bicycles will probably always be a niche market because the waiting list is always so long. Most people aren't willing to place an order and wait around for a year, or sometimes even 2 or 3 years
or 7
for their bicycle to show up, or even 7 years. Does somebody have a 7-year waiting list? Bike porn. Here we go.
Yeah.
Again, the Brian Bayless C cluster.
And right it you do.
Yes, I do.
Only on those special days when you're in the Bayless mood.
When I'm in the Bayless mood.
Another approach to this, rather than spending tons and tons of money, is to go and fish out a good old Fuji Bridgestone or Miata frame. That's what some people are doing, and dressing them up. Have you heard about that?
No. Fuji, friend, you're killing me.